Lev, you could start off by setting up what happened, because Lev, you have some recent articles that you wrote at the forward tracing what just happened in Canada. And of course, when I say what's happened, we're talking about Ukraine Nazi Gate.
Yeah, well, what happened is a bunch of people in Western Ukraine joined Hitler and welcomed the Nazis and formed a Waffen-SS division. And they all had a lot of fun. One of them indeed wrote that it was the best times of his life, 1941 to 1943. Fast forward, and they painted themselves as war victims and as freedom fighters, and then Canada took them in with open arms. They continued having fun in Canada. They built monuments to themselves. They had lives. They grew old, and one of them was celebrated 3 days ago in the Canadian Parliament, where he was presented as a fighter against Russia, which he technically was alongside Adolf Hitler and others who fought against Russia.
Yeah.
Ivan Kachanovsky, who is a professor from University of Ottawa, he was the first one to report about him on Twitter, and then I was the first one to write a story about him, and eventually things went not as good for him. So right now Poland is thinking of possibly looking into extraditing him for war crimes, and Justin Trudeau issued a half apology before talking about how we need to be careful about Russia, because that's what it's really about, Russia. And the Speaker of the House resigned, and Volodymyr Zelensky, who was there, and who was one of the people enthusiastically cheering for him, has so far said nothing at all.
Let's take a look at this speech that the Speaker of Canada's Parliament gave, in which he praises this elderly gentleman.
Here in the chamber today, Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. His name is Yaroslav Hunka. And I was going to say he's in the gallery, but I think you beat me to that. But I'm very proud to say that he is from North Bay and from my riding of Nipissing-Temiskaming.
God, I hope they just play that over and over and over for the rest of my life. That is the only thing that finally burst that Ukrainian, Canadian, emigre Nazi bubble, because nothing else would do it. It's incredible. Like, there was that pause when he says, and he fought the Russians in World War II, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, Russians were allies. But then he just kind of went on, and it was just like a slight little brain fart. But they're so deep. I mean, they've been doing this over and over so often that I think that no one expected that this would actually be the thing that got them in trouble, because this has been going on endlessly. And I spoke to my sources in Canada, but I was having like back and forth with other people who've been researching this in Canada, who've been extremely frustrated for many years now about how hard it is to break through into the Canadian discourse. It's like, these are Nazis, but we talked about this, and this was different. And I actually did think this would that it had to break through. And I think Lev's article had a big influence on kind of pushing the discourse to a new level, because I did notice that when people were calling it out, like on Twitter, normally you have you get used to sort of the bot fauna. And the bot fauna, the troll fauna that came into like my replies, for example, was very different than the usual one. They were a little nervous. And then when Lev's piece came out, it was like, what? This is in a Jewish, reputable Jewish magazine or
Right, the
media.
Forward.
Yeah,
Right.
the Forward. And that made them even more nervous. And you saw them sort of trying out different narrative rebuttals, like he was only 16 or 17. Yeah, well, when he was, then he wrote that 1941 to 1943 were the best years of his life, and then he joined the Waffen SS.
Volunteered,
He
Yeah,
volunteered, but
right.
it's like, but he's 80 now. Yeah, and somebody said, yeah, he's only 80 when he wrote that those were the best years of his life. Yeah, I mean, maybe when he's 90.
I mean, look,
Yeah,
when you were
he didn't-
16
he
years
was-
old,
He was
that
naive.
the
He
best
was
years
a
of his life.
he was a naive.
He was a
80-year-old.
babe.
Yeah.
He was
Babe
talking about
in
his
the woods.
youth in general. He was talking about his youth.
A babe in the
general.
Nazi woods. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, this is the culmination. I think the people who don't really know the backstory to how the Canadian Parliament can actually, bring a Nazi into the gallery and give like a full house standing ovation, like it's the end of like
That was like
Phantom,
20
the opera
seconds
or something.
long.
Like
I know. No, that was
it was
more
like it was
the
like
Pope or
please come out one more time. Yeah, exactly. It was like a full. I mean, it's like what now? I don't know how many years it's been. It's what 75. It's been at least a 75-year-old project. Ever since the end of World War II. I mean, a 75-year-old project to buy this Ukrainian community that's been in exile in Canada. That I mean, not everyone was like a fascist or Nazi collaborator, but the core of that community, like the brain trust of that community, they were extremely ideological. They were part of this hardcore fascist movement that wanted to create a kind of a version of what Hitler was doing in Germany. They wanted to create that for themselves in Ukraine. They wanted to create a racially pure Ukraine, free of Jews, free of Poles, free of Russians, and they nearly succeeded. And a lot of these people, either through just as in leadership roles or an actual hands-on experience, ethnically cleansed and genocided Jews and Polish people from the territory of what is modern, Western Ukraine and now, and even central Ukraine. They went pretty far. They went pretty far to the east, and so a lot of these people, the Brain Trust, found refuge in the West. They found refuge in America. They found refuge in Canada. They found refuge in the UK. And with support from, I won't name these institutions, three-letter agencies, frequently, they had funding from the U.S. government, from covert projects, from the CIA. And they didn't need this help, but they had it, and they had their support. And they essentially went on this revisionist. They did this revisionist project where they recast their sort of genocidal fascist political movement into one that was about democracy. One was about fighting communism,
decolonialism, right? Or
yeah, like now it would be called. Yeah, they were like they were trying to decolonize Ukraine from the Soviet Union, and so they were just fighting the Bolsheviks, and they were fighting not just on for themselves, but on behalf of all the enslaved people, of the Soviet Union, for the the Latvians, the Estonians, the Lithuanians, the Georgians,
and to preserve white Europe. I mean,
well, they don't. Yeah, they don't talk about that. That's not the rebranded version.
That's part of the discourse. It's not part of the discourse.
It kind of is, but they use slightly different language to protect Europe from the Mongols in Russia, is what they say. Yeah.
But they recast themselves as this, basically a kind of good Democrats, patriots, anti-communists, first and foremost. And they have been very effective in editing the history of their movements, and to the point where someone like in Canada, I mean, Canada is probably the most extreme version of that, because you couldn't get away with this stuff in America. I mean, you could have, the Prime Minister of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, constantly meet with these Ukrainian groups who are, I mean, they are basically, it's crazy. They're like rebranded logos that they have for themselves. It's like the League of Ukrainian Canadians, for instance, right? Their logo, it has like a maple leaf in the center, and it's kind of this triangle. It is the logo of the OUN, of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, that was led by Stepan Bandera, the one that was basically, he is like the Hitler of Ukraine, basically, like the little Hitler of Ukraine. It is exactly the same, except they just stuck a maple leaf on it, and they changed a couple of letters around. Yeah, and then you have the top politicians from in Canada, meeting with them, tweeting about it constantly,
Yeah.
and it's in the open, and so you have this Canada is just this really an extreme case of this. It's almost, it's shocking that this is allowed to go on, and I am very glad that this finally happened.
too.
I mean, I
This
think for a lot of us, have been writing about this, have been following this. This is like almost like a cathartic moment, because for the first time, it's actually something's.
A lot of us have been keeping each other sane, because I would be like, Mark and Yasha, Nazis are bad, right? Like, this is happening, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking, because it felt,
And I should mention, by the way, for people watching, I think I joked about this earlier, but Lev is Ukrainian American Jewish. Yasha, how do you identify? I don't want to put you in a box.
Well, I mean, half of my family,
You're
I'd say three-quarters of my. Yeah, exactly. I'm a born again communist. Yeah. No, but three out of four of my grandparents come from Ukraine. I was born in what is now the Russian Federation. I mean, I was born in the Soviet Union, in Leningrad. So I don't know how as a Soviet Jew, as a Soviet American, I don't really know.
And then Mark,
California Jew, but my roots are, I mean, my grandmother's family's from Ivano-Frankivsk, which is now like a stronghold of ultra far right Bandera nationalism, but used to be Jewish. And they were all exterminated at first by Petyoras and other Ukrainian groups from 1918 to 1921, and then of course
I think like 200 survived out of 20,000. Like it was.
Yeah. And I'm just a New York Jew with family from Belarusia and stuff. But yeah.
I mean, my family, my family, essentially, as far as I can reconstruct some of the history, because this wasn't really talked about in my family. I mean, they fled the famine in Ukraine, from what I can understand. Trying to why they left the shtetl at the time that they left, and they ended up in Crimea, and they kind of ran from the famine, and so they were part of the what was now known as the Holodomor, the famine in Ukraine. And so they were Jews, and they were affected like a lot of Ukrainian Jews were affected in this famine. Of course, Jews, they were a minority in Ukraine, but they were a large minority, and like everyone who lived at the time during the famine, they were affected by it. And so, I
thought we caused it, Yasha.
Well, that's
the
it's a typical self-hating Jew. You just famine yourself just because you just hate
self-famining Jews.
Auto-famine, yeah.
We put ourselves in the gas chambers too.
Self-famining, self-gassing,
But I mean, this is crazy. This story, like you guys are saying, it finally broke through. Lev, what can you tell us about this actual particular Nazi?
Two things.
Yeah.
First of all, Yasha has been writing, and he should plug it. He's been writing a phenomenal just history, and it's, I don't even know what it is. It's part memoir, part family history, part just a story about how immigrants are used and are woven into Americans' foreign policy. Blah 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 blah. It's been fascinating.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much.
1, 2. I don't have the exact info for this, but one thing I found also fascinating is that an ancillary benefit of bringing in these Waffen-SS men was they used them as strike breakers.
Yes. I wanted to say that too. No, that's a great point, because we have to remember that Ukraine. So we know the Ukrainian diaspora now is very reactionary, right-wing nationalist. It wasn't like that. Go ahead, Lev, but it's a really important point to make. And there are still a lot of Ukrainians, like especially in Canada, who are angry about this, and they've been key to exposing, for all of us, things like Chrystia Freeland's grandfather. That's thanks to Ukrainian immigrants in Canada. So,
well, it's 99% of Ukraine fought against the Nazis. It's like I hate it when Western media is like, these people are seen as heroes in Ukraine. They're not. They're seen as heroes in the very tiny part of Ukraine. But they were brought in as strike breakers because, I mean, you have people who need jobs, who are immigrants who need jobs. You have people who are well organized. You have people who are excellent at carrying out violence and experienced, and you have people who are programmed to hate anything that smacks of socialism
and communism. Because there was a pretty strong communist party in Canada. I mean, the union presence in Canada was very strong, and so they were brought in as like fascists being, again, anti-communist. They were brought in as anti-communist muscle to break up the unions.
Fascism was violent strike breaking at first. I mean, that they evolved from violent strike breaking to a larger program. But yeah,
I think, don't quote me on this, I'm going to do some more research, but I think there's evidence that some Canadian business magnates actually played a key role in bringing them in, specifically for that reason.
I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
But the third and the biggest thing that I want to say is, okay, there's these people, Junca, these people who murdered the Jews in the Poles, and the people in the diaspora who whitewashed them. They are essentially doing their jobs, for lack of a better word.
Yes.
I mean, the people who are whitewashing them, they love them. They think they're great, and they're doing, so they put together bullshit historical narratives and all that part. Okay, there is one group of people, one group that was not doing their jobs, and that is the Canadian Jewish organizations for a long time. Okay, these are the people who have large buttons on their websites that says, "Please give me money to fight anti-Semitism." Okay, and I don't know about Yasha, but I mean, I grew up I was idolizing the American Jewish communities who helped us, who brought us over here out of the Soviet Union, and I had the awakening of my life when I started contacting these Jewish organizations. I'm like, this is happening. These people are running Nazis. Like, obviously you're going to speak out, right? Like, I was like, they didn't know. And the awakening was to find out that they did know. They were just they were choosing to remain silent.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest, I'll tell you that, I just, last month I reported about Philadelphia and monuments in Philadelphia. SS Galician, this unit has monuments in U.S. soil in Detroit and Philadelphia. And the biggest difference out of everything is that the Jewish groups in Philadelphia, the regional Jewish groups, were like, holy shit, this is awful. And they started speaking out. That was the people who are supposed to do their job did their job. Yeah. Okay. And finally in Canada, like, it's like the emperor's new clothes. You know what I mean? Like, Jewish groups spoke, the people who are they did their job. And that was like the biggest thing ever. And there's the silence before it, to me, was one of the most shameful things imaginable.